They said no one survived the blizzard that swept through North Willow last winter. But when the storm finally broke, a man named Michael Carter and his loyal shepherd, Ranger, heard a faint cry along the frozen riverbank. Beneath the snow, they found another dog, black and brown, barely alive, a broken collar around its neck engraved with one word: Shadow. They thought they'd found a survivor, but when Shadow opened his eyes, he led them to something far darker. A hidden place beneath the snow, a trail of cages, and a secret that would shatter the quiet heart of their small Montana town. This is a story of loyalty, redemption, and the light that still burns beneath the coldest silence. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the miracles that walk beside us every day. The town of North Willow, Montana lay under a white silence. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered everywhere. On the frozen eaves, the brittle trees, and the heavy clouds that refused to break apart. The air was so cold it seemed to hum. On mornings like this, breath turned to glass and time itself slowed, waiting for spring to find its courage again. Michael Carter, 42, moved through the snow with a steady rhythm. Once, years ago, he had run into burning buildings without hesitation, a firefighter whose courage was spoken of in every corner of Helena County. But those days were gone. Since losing his wife to a house fire he couldn't reach in time, Michael had left the sirens behind. The tragedy carved lines into his weathered face, creases of grief and grit. His dark brown hair had silvered early at the temples, and a short beard covered the sharp planes of his jaw. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had seen the worst and survived only half of it. Beside him bounded Ranger, his 7-year-old German shepherd. The dog's fur was thick, gold with streaks of charcoal down the spine, his ears perpetually alert. A veteran of search and rescue missions, Ranger moved with purpose, scanning the world as if danger could still hide beneath the snow. The two shared an unspoken rhythm, every movement of man answered by the pause of dog, every silence shared like a heartbeat. Inside the cabin near the river, Grace, Michael's 10-year-old daughter, watched them through frost-blurred glass. She was small, with hair the color of wheat and eyes far too old for her years, eyes that had learned early the meaning of loss. Since her mother's death, she had become her father's quiet companion, speaking when he forgot how. She often said that Ranger could feel prayers long before God heard them. That morning, the sky was the color of steel. Michael swung his shovel into the drift piled against the riverbank, clearing the path for melting waters that would not come for months. His body ached from the cold, yet he found solace in the rhythm of the work. It was something he could control, unlike the fire that had taken everything, unlike the silence that now filled his home. Ranger stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the ground. His body stiffened, tail straight, a low rumble growing in his chest. Michael froze. He recognized that sound, the same alert Ranger gave when he'd found a survivor beneath rubble years ago. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked once, then began to dig furiously into the snow near the river's cracked edge. The air sharpened with tension. Michael dropped to his knees, brushing away ice until his gloved fingers hit something solid. Fur. He cleared faster, heart pounding. A body emerged. A dog, larger than Ranger, coat black streaked with brown, stiff with blood and frost. The creature's side rose in shallow, stuttering breaths. Michael peeled off a glove, pressed his hand to its chest. Faint pulse. Still alive. Easy now, he murmured. You're safe. He slipped his coat off, wrapping the trembling body, lifting it carefully. The dog's head lolled against his arm. Around its neck was a broken metal collar, scratched but still legible. Shadow. As Michael carried the dog toward the cabin, Ranger trotted beside him, whining softly. Grace met them at the door, eyes wide. Dad, is it? He's alive, Michael answered, voice low but urgent. Barely. Get the blankets. They laid the stranger near the fire. The smell of wet fur filled the cabin as steam rose from the melting frost. Shadow's chest heaved unevenly. One ear was torn, his left paw twisted awkwardly. Yet beneath the dirt and wounds, he was magnificent. A shepherd built strong and lean, perhaps a year younger than Ranger, with the noble muzzle of a working dog. Michael examined the scars, some old and healed, others raw and deliberate. This wasn't an accident of the storm. Someone had done this. Grace knelt beside the dog, her small hand brushing its face. He's trying to say something, she whispered. Michael met her gaze, the flicker of fire reflected in his tired eyes. Maybe he is, he said. If he survived that blizzard, he's got a reason. Hours passed. Shadow stirred once, eyes opening to meet Ranger's. The two stared at each other, a silent recognition, ancient and wordless, as if one carried a memory the other had lost. Then Shadow's head fell back against the blanket, a sigh escaping him like the wind through pine. Outside, night crawled in, swallowing the last color of the snow. Michael sat by the window, unable to sleep. The storm was gone, yet his mind still heard it, the howl of wind, the brittle cry of something unseen. Then Ranger rose from the hearth, ears pricked. He padded to the door and barked sharply, once, twice. "What is it, boy?" Michael asked, standing. The dog barked again, louder, staring toward the dark line of the forest. For a heartbeat, the wind seemed to answer, a distant clang of metal carried across the valley. Michael felt it, deep in his bones, that old instinct stirring again, the feeling that somewhere, someone still needed saving. Grace appeared behind him, clutching her blanket. "Dad, there's another one, isn't there?" Michael's jaw tightened. He looked out into the night, where the storm had died, but the cold still ruled. Ranger barked once more, urgent now. Michael reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Maybe there is," he whispered. From far beyond the trees came a faint reply, a whimper, soft and broken, swallowed by the wind. The silence of North Willow was no longer empty. It was listening. The snow outside had not stopped. It fell in slow, deliberate flakes, whispering against the cabin's frosted windows. The fire inside struggled to hold its color, throwing faint orange light across the wooden floor. The smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke, sharp and strange in the small space. Elena Brooks, the town's only veterinarian, leaned over the wounded German shepherd laid out on an old wool blanket. She was 36, tall and narrow-shouldered, with dark auburn hair tied back in a loose knot. Her eyes were gray, focused, and tired from too many midnight calls and not enough rest. A small scar ran down her left wrist, a souvenir from a frightened horse years ago, proof that kindness for her had always come with a cost. She had known Michael since high school, back before he learned how silence could become armor. Now she pressed a cloth to Shadow's leg, murmuring softly, "Easy, boy. You're safe." The dog trembled beneath her touch, a low growl escaping his throat before fading into a whine. The muscles in his neck were tense, and when Elena found the metallic glint under his fur, she froze. "Michael," she said, voice low. "There's something inside his collar." Michael Carter knelt beside her. The firelight carved hard lines into his face, shadows deepening the weary hollows beneath his eyes. He was still in his winter coat, the cuffs dark with melted snow. "What is it?" Elena lifted a small metal chip with her tweezers, its surface scorched, the serial number barely visible. "This isn't a tag," she whispered. "It's an identification chip, industrial, not domestic. And look here, someone tried to burn it off." She turned it toward the light. The half-melted numbers read BLK-074. Her brow furrowed. "That prefix, I've seen it before. It belongs to Blake Logistics, the shipping company that opened near the industrial park last year." Michael frowned. "The one near the highway?" She nodded. "Yes. I thought they handled livestock and research shipments for the labs out west." "But—" Her gaze fell back to the shepherd. "This isn't livestock. This is a trained dog. Look at his paws. See the old calluses? He used to run long distances. He's purebred, probably from a line of working shepherds. Someone wanted him for something." Michael said nothing. He looked at Shadow, the animal's sides heaving with shallow breaths. The thought of someone chaining a dog like this made his jaw tighten. He had seen cruelty before, in fire, in war, in grief, but this kind was colder. Colder than snow, colder than the silence that had followed Sarah's death. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. Why would a company like that need a dog? Elena hesitated. Testing, maybe. Behavioral studies. There are labs that buy dogs from illegal breeders. They don't always ask where they come from. Grace, sitting quietly near the fire, pulled her knees to her chest. Her chum's wide hazel eyes watched every move, her small face pale in the firelight. "They hurt him?" she asked, barely a whisper. Elena looked at her gently. "He's safe now, sweetheart." But Shadow wasn't at ease. His body tensed, and his claws scratched against the wood. His breathing grew rapid. When Michael reached out, the dog snapped his head up, teeth bared, then immediately whimpered as though ashamed. He staggered to his feet, limping toward the door, nails scraping across the floorboards. "Easy, Shadow," Michael said quietly. Ranger stepped forward then. The older shepherd moved with calm precision, tail low, eyes steady. He approached the trembling dog and touched noses with him, a soft, instinctive gesture. The sound that came from Shadow was almost human, a broken exhale that carried exhaustion, fear, and something like relief. The two dogs stood still for a heartbeat, heads touching, and in that silence, understanding passed between them. Michael felt the air shift. Ranger turned, looked at him, then at the door, pawing at it once, twice. His brown eyes, intelligent and unwavering, spoke clearly. Michael had seen that look before, years ago, in a burning building, when Ranger had found a trapped child and refused to leave without her. "Ranger thinks there are more," Michael said softly. Elena's hand froze mid-motion. "More? Out there?" He nodded toward the window, where snow swirled like smoke beyond the glass. If Shadow came from that place, he didn't escape alone. He's trying to go back. Elena wiped her hands on a towel. "Michael, the storm hasn't stopped. We'll lose the tracks." He looked up at her. If we wait until morning, the tracks will be gone completely. Grace's voice broke in, small and trembling. Dad, it's dangerous. Michael knelt by her, placing a calloused hand on her shoulder. I know, but sometimes danger isn't the worst thing. Sometimes the worst thing is knowing and doing nothing. He looked into her eyes, Sarah's eyes, and smiled faintly. I'll be careful. I promise. Elena exhaled, the weight of choice pressing down on her. She had lost patience before, but never because she didn't try. She grabbed her parka from the chair. If you're going, I'm coming. I've got the medical kit. Michael nodded once. No arguments. No hesitation. Just understanding. The kind that exists between people who have already made peace with risk. He reached for his coat, fastened the zipper, and slung a flashlight over his shoulder. The beam flickered weakly, swallowed by the draft from the door. Ranger stood ready, muscles taut, fur bristling along his spine. Shadow limped to his side, steadying himself. The dogs exchanged one last glance, part instinct, part vow. Michael turned to Grace. Lock the door behind us. Keep the fire going. We'll bring them home. She nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. Bring them all home, she whispered. The door creaked open, and the cold rushed in like a living thing. The first gust of snow stung their faces, sharp as glass. Elena flicked on her flashlight. The beam caught the endless white stretching into the woods. Michael stepped forward, his boots crunching over the ice, followed by the two shepherds, the veteran and the survivor, moving in silent rhythm. As the door shut behind them, the last flicker of lamplight vanished, replaced by the vast emptiness of the storm. In the distance, through the wail of the wind, came a sound, soft, metallic, and rhythmic. The faint echo of chains. The storm had returned without warning. Snow drifted sideways through the trees, carried by a wind that howled like something alive. The light from Michael's headlamp cut a narrow path through the darkness, reflecting off shards of ice that clung to every branch. His breath rose in heavy clouds, the sound of his boots crunching against the frozen ground, the only rhythm in the vast silence. Beside him, Ranger moved with purpose, his large frame steady and sure despite the storm. The German shepherd's coat, thick and gray along the back, shimmered with flakes of frost. Every step he took was measured, every pause deliberate. At 7 years old, Ranger carried the quiet discipline of a veteran soldier. Scars along his front leg told stories of fires, rescues, and things that Michael no longer had words for. Behind them, Elena Brooks trudged forward, her face pale against the wind. The hood of her parka was lined with snow, and her gloved fingers tightened around the medical bag slung across her shoulder. She had insisted on coming, though Michael could see the fatigue in her eyes. "Still think this is a good idea?" she called through the gusts. Michael didn't answer immediately. He stopped, knelt to touch the faint trail of red staining the snow, blood, thin and already freezing. He wiped his fingers against his coat and straightened. "The storm's covering everything," he said quietly. "We'll lose it if we stop now." Elena moved closer, her breath fogging the air. "Then we'd better hurry." Trailing a few paces behind was Shadow, his black and tan coat patchy and dull from injury. His ribs showed through his fur, and every step seemed to cost him effort. Yet he didn't falter. The younger shepherd's eyes, amber and sharp, were fixed on something beyond the blizzard, as though he could still hear the cries of the dogs he'd left behind. Michael caught himself glancing at Shadow more than once. There was something in that dog's expression. Guilt, determination, and fear all tangled together. That felt too human. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror after every fire he couldn't save someone from. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured. "We'll find them." Ranger barked once, low and sharp. Michael's head snapped up. The older dog had veered toward a clearing where the snow was thinner, his nose pressed close to the ground. They followed him through the tangle of trees until the forest broke open into a wide expanse of white. Beyond it stood a structure, an old freight warehouse left to rot beside the tracks. The building sagged under the weight of years, its tin roof rusted and its windows boarded. The faded sign above the door read, "Blake Logistics, Storage Unit 4. Elena stopped beside him. "Michael," she whispered, "this is it." Michael felt his pulse quicken. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust and something else he couldn't name. He moved toward the main door, testing the padlock. It was old, corroded, but the snow beneath it had been disturbed. Fresh footprints, heavy and wide, led toward the loading bay. He brushed the snow away from the chain. "Someone's been here recently." "Do you hear that?" Elena asked. At first he didn't. Then it came. A faint sound beneath the wind. A whine, thin and high-pitched. Then another. The sound of claws scraping metal. Michael's throat tightened. "They're in there." He pulled the crowbar from his pack and jammed it into the lock. The iron groaned, then snapped with a loud crack. The door swung open with a metallic scream. Inside, the air was heavy and cold. The only light came from a flickering bulb strung from a wire above, casting the long shadows of cages stacked against the walls. The smell hit first: urine, fear, and decay. Dozens of German shepherds huddled in narrow pens, their bodies thin, fur matted. Some lifted their heads weakly. Others didn't move at all. Elena gasped. "Oh my God." She dropped to her knees beside the nearest cage, pressing her hand to the bars. "Easy, babies. We're here now." From the far end of the warehouse came a voice, calm and cutting. "You're trespassing, Carter." Michael turned toward the sound. A man stepped into the light. Trevor Blake, tall, broad-shouldered, his face angular and clean-shaven. He wore a long coat of dark wool, his hair slicked back neatly, eyes pale as glass. Everything about him was orderly. His stance, his tone, even the way he adjusted his gloves. But there was something hollow in those eyes, an emptiness that made Michael's skin crawl. Trevor smiled, though it never reached his eyes. "You always did have a hero complex," he said, his voice smooth as the ice outside. "But breaking into private property? That's new." Michael took a step forward, fists clenched. "These aren't property. They're living creatures." Trevor's smile widened. "Living creatures that happen to pay my bills. The labs don't care where they come from, Carter. They just pay for results." He gestured around him. "Supply and demand. Simple economics." Ranger growled low, the fur along his spine rising. Shadow whimpered softly behind him, torn between fear and fury. Michael's heart pounded. He remembered the last time he'd faced flames this close. That same helpless rage. Elena rose, trembling but defiant. "You're killing them," she said. "Do you even hear yourself?" Trevor's expression turned cold. "They're animals, Doctor. They were bred to serve, just like soldiers." His gaze shifted to Michael. or firefighters who can't save their wives. The words hit like a punch. For a heartbeat, the room spun. Michael's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening. "You don't get to talk about her." Trevor raised an eyebrow, amused by the reaction. "Touch a nerve, did I?" Before Michael could move, the deep rumble of an engine cut through the zone. Tension. Outside, headlights flashed against the warehouse walls. Trevor looked toward the door and smirked. "Excuse me," he said. "I have a shipment to finish." Michael's eyes followed him as he crossed to the loading bay. Through the open door, a large truck was idling in the snow, its trailer sealed shut. "What's in there?" Elena demanded. Trevor paused, his silhouette framed by the falling snow. "The next batch," he said simply. Then he motioned with his hand, and the driver revved the engine. The truck began to move. Ranger barked furiously, lunging forward. Michael reacted instinctively, sprinting after the retreating vehicle. Elena followed, slipping on the ice but refusing to stop. Shadow, despite his injuries, forced his body into motion, his paws leaving streaks of red across the snow. The truck's taillights blurred through the blizzard, disappearing into the white. Michael shouted after it, his voice lost in the storm. Behind him, the warehouse lights flickered out, plunging the world into darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, from the cages still left behind, came a chorus of faint, desperate howls. The wind tore through the valley like a living thing, howling over the frozen bridge that spanned the half-frozen river below. Snow lashed sideways in long white ribbons, blinding and merciless. The headlights of the truck flickered against the storm, their glow distorted by the veil of sleet. The old bridge groaned under its weight, steel joints creaking, ice fracturing inch by inch. Trevor Blake stood near the edge, his long black coat flapping violently, his voice sharp and cruel as it cut through the roar of the storm. "Dump the cargo," he shouted to the driver. "Now! No evidence left behind." His face, once composed and handsome in its corporate precision, was now drawn tight with panic. The cold had stripped the color from his cheeks, and sweat mingled with snow across his brow. Down the hill, Michael Carter pushed through the blizzard, his boots sinking deep into the snowdrifts. Every breath stabbed his lungs with cold. His gloved hands gripped the strap of his flashlight, its beam slicing through the white void. Ranger ran ahead, his fur heavy with ice, his muscles taut with instinct. Shadow followed, limping but unyielding, the fresh bandages around his ribs already stained with red. The two German shepherds moved as one, their bodies dark silhouettes against the pale storm. Michael's heart hammered as he caught sight of the truck. The bridge looked like a cracked spine of glass suspended over the black, churning water. "Trevor!" he bellowed, his voice raw. "Don't do this. Those are living beings, not cargo." Trevor turned sharply, his pale eyes gleaming under the headlights. His lips curled into a twisted smirk. "You don't understand, Carter. In this world, only what makes money is worth saving." Behind him, the driver hesitated, a young man barely out of his 20s, his breath fogging the window of the cab. He looked terrified. "Sir, the bridge. It's not stable." "Do it!" Trevor barked, slamming his fist against the side of the truck. Michael moved closer, his boots slipping on the slick surface. The bridge vibrated beneath his weight. His mind raced, years of firefighting training flashing back. Risk assessment, pressure points, survival odds. But this wasn't fire. This was something colder and crueler. He glanced down. Beneath the broken planks, dark water shifted sluggishly, reflecting the red of the taillights like blood. Ranger growled deep in his throat, teeth bared. Shadow, beside him, trembled, not from fear, but exhaustion. His breath came in short, wheezing bursts. Yet when the first cage in the back of the truck shifted, rattling with muffled whimpers from the trapped dogs inside, Shadow's ears perked up. He barked, weak but desperate, as if calling out to them, his lost pack. Trevor sneered. "Pathetic," he muttered, stepping backward. The ice beneath his boots cracked with a sharp, clean sound. He froze. Then, like a gunshot, a fissure raced across the bridge, splitting the surface beneath him. "Trevor, move!" Michael shouted, sprinting forward. But Trevor slipped. His foot went out from under him, and suddenly he was sliding toward the edge. The world seemed to slow, the scream of metal, the roar of the wind, the crack of breaking ice all blurring together. His body teetered over the river's edge, his arms flailing for balance. Before Michael could reach him, Shadow lunged. The injured shepherd launched himself forward with what strength remained, his jaws locking onto Trevor's coat sleeve. The fabric tore, but the grip held. The man's weight dragged the dog dangerously close to the edge. Shadow's paws scraped at the ice, claws bleeding as he dug in. Michael dove, grabbing Trevor by the back of his collar and hauling with all his strength. For a moment, it felt like the bridge itself was giving way beneath them. Then, with a final heave, he pulled both man and dog back onto solid ice. They collapsed in a tangled heap. Trevor lay gasping, his chest heaving, staring at the animal that had saved him. It saved me?" His voice cracked, disbelief cutting through the arrogance. He looked into Shadow's amber eyes, wide and alert despite the pain. Michael straightened slowly, his face shadowed beneath the stormlight. "The thing you called worthless," he said quietly, "just gave you your life." Trevor looked away, shivering, not from the cold, but from something far older and heavier, shame. Then, from the distance, blue and red lights pierced the storm. The whine of engines grew louder, echoing down the valley. Ranger barked once, sharp and triumphant. The glow of emergency lights reflected off the frost, flashes of crimson against white. Elena Brooks appeared first, stepping out of a snow-covered patrol vehicle. Her face was pale but fierce under the swirling snow. Behind her came Sheriff Brooks, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a grizzled beard and the calm authority of someone who had seen too much. His uniform was dusted with frost, his expression carved from ice. Elena held up a small black hard drive encased in a waterproof sleeve. "This," she shouted over the wind, "is everything. The footage, the transfers, the records. Every single illegal shipment." She turned toward the sheriff. "All of it was on their system. I planted the camera before we left." The sheriff nodded once, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "You've done enough, Doctor." He turned to Trevor, who still sat trembling beside the bridge rail. "Trevor Blake, you're under arrest for animal cruelty, illegal transport, and obstruction of justice." Two deputies moved forward, pulling Trevor to his feet. His face was ashen. He didn't resist. The metallic click of handcuffs was swallowed by the wind. For a moment, the man who once spoke of profit and control looked utterly hollow, his eyes darting toward Shadow, with something close to fear, or maybe understanding. The officers led him away. Michael knelt beside Shadow. The dog was motionless, his chest rising faintly. Ranger pressed close, licking the younger shepherd's muzzle, whining softly. Snowflakes melted on their fur, glistening like tears in the headlights. Elena rushed to them, kneeling beside Michael. Her gloved hands hovered over Shadow's body. "He's in shock," she whispered. "His heart rate's dropping." Michael swallowed hard, feeling the sting in his eyes. "Hang on, boy," he murmured, voice breaking. "You made it this far." Ranger nudged Shadow's neck, refusing to move. His steady brown eyes locked on his injured companion. The sound of the storm faded into stillness, replaced by the faint rhythm of labored breathing. Above them, the wind slowed, and snow began to fall gently instead of violently. It was as if the world itself had taken a breath. The flashing police lights painted the snow crimson, blue, and white, colors of both danger and salvation. Michael looked up, his face illuminated by the reflection. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the emptiness that had followed him since Sarah's death. For the first time, he felt something else, a fragile kind of peace born from chaos. He turned back to Shadow and Ranger. "You did good," he whispered. "You both did." Shadow's eyes fluttered once, his tail giving the faintest twitch before falling still. Ranger lowered his head, resting it gently on the younger dog's neck. In the distance, Trevor's voice rose in protest as he was loaded into the patrol car, but it was swallowed by the storm's last breath. And on that bridge of ice and blood, beneath the falling snow, two shepherds stood side by side, silent, steadfast, and unyielding. The morning came quietly, as if the storm had never been. Snow still blanketed the ground, but it no longer screamed under the wind. Instead, it lay soft and heavy, a sea of white reflecting the pale gold of dawn. The world felt reborn, fragile yet forgiving. Michael Carter stood on the porch of his cabin, his breath curling in the cold air. The lines on his face, carved from years of loss and labor, seemed softer now. He wore his old firefighter jacket, the one that had survived flames and frost alike. His gray-streaked beard glistened with the mist of melting snow. For the first time in years, his shoulders no longer slumped under invisible weight. The silence that used to haunt him now carried a different tone, peace instead of emptiness. From the distance came faint laughter. His daughter's. Grace Carter, 10 years old and as radiant as the first thaw of spring, was in the yard. Her chestnut hair fluttered beneath a red wool cap, her small hands clutching a wooden sign nearly as tall as she was. She was trying to hang it on the front gate, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in fierce concentration. Michael watched her, his lips curving into a rare, unguarded smile. Grace was the echo of everything he had lost and everything he had fought to protect. The storm had frightened her, but it hadn't broken her spirit. She still believed that good things survived, even through the coldest nights. Behind Michael, the cabin door creaked open, releasing a wave of warmth. Dr. Elena Brooks stepped out, adjusting her heavy scarf. Her auburn hair was tucked under a knitted cap, and her pale cheeks glowed from the fire inside. Beneath her thick coat, her posture carried both exhaustion and quiet triumph. The events of the last 24 hours had taken their toll, but her eyes, gray and steady, held a spark of contentment. She had been at Michael's side through the worst of it, patching wounds, comforting Grace, and ensuring the dogs survived the night. Elena wasn't a woman easily shaken. She had faced cruelty before in her line of work, and each scar had made her stronger, more compassionate. She joined Michael on the porch, folding her arms against the cold. "He's resting," she said softly. "Shadow will live, but he needs time. His body's healing, But his spirit. She paused, looking out toward the snowy field. That will take longer. Michael nodded slowly. We all need time, don't we? His voice carried the kind of calm that only comes after chaos. Down near the old barn, Ranger, the loyal German shepherd who had never once abandoned his master's side, lay curled beside a patch of hay. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, thick and proud, though his eyes were half closed with fatigue. Next to him, Shadow, the younger shepherd they had saved from the river, slept with his head resting on Ranger's paws. The difference between them was striking. Ranger's golden sable fur contrasted with Shadow's deep, black and tan coat. One was strength and steadiness, the other fragility and rebirth. But together, they looked like mirror images of devotion. Elena stepped closer, her voice hushed as though afraid to disturb the peace. It's strange, isn't it? How much pain they can endure and still choose to trust us. Michael's gaze lingered on the two dogs. They're better at forgiveness than we are. Elena smiled faintly. Maybe that's why we need them. The sound of tires crunching snow broke the silence. A police cruiser rolled down the lane, its lights dim but still flashing faintly in the daylight. Sheriff Brooks, Elena's father, and a man built like the mountains he patrolled, stepped out. His gray beard was rimmed with frost, his uniform heavy with snow. He approached Michael, his expression solemn but kind. It's done, he said simply. Blake Logistics has been shut down. The state's pressing charges, animal cruelty, trafficking, falsified records. It'll take years to sort through it all. Michael exhaled, a cloud of mist escaping his lips. And Trevor? The sheriff's jaw tightened. He's in custody, denying everything, of course. But the footage your friend here captured sealed his fate. He nodded toward Elena, who gave a modest shrug. Michael looked out toward the trees, where the last traces of the storm were melting into rivulets of water. He'll have plenty of time to think, he said quietly. Maybe he'll finally learn what value really means. The sheriff gave a grunt of agreement, then turned back to his truck. I'll file the final report this afternoon. The state wants to commend you for your help. Michael shook his head. I didn't do it for them. The sheriff paused, studying the man's face. No. You did it for the right reasons. That's rarer than you think. With a nod, he walked back to his cruiser, the door slamming shut with a muffled thud. The day wore on gently. Sunlight melted the icicles along the porch. Grace finished hammering the wooden sign into the fence, stepping back proudly to admire her work. The carved letters read, North Star Cottage, where every paw finds its way home. The wood still smelled of pine, and the edges were painted a soft gold. When she turned toward her father, her cheeks glowed with pride. Do you like it? She asked. Michael crouched, brushing snow from her shoulder. I love it, he said. It's perfect. Grace grinned and ran off toward the dogs, her laughter echoing across the clearing. Michael watched her go, then lifted his eyes to the sky. The last fragments of cloud were drifting apart, revealing a pale sun that looked almost like a halo. Beside him, Elena slipped her arm through his, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. They stood there in silence, watching the two shepherds lying side by side under the cottonwood tree, the snow around them beginning to glisten like glass. Michael crouched beside them, his hand running through Ranger's thick fur, then gently over Shadow's scarred neck. The younger dog stirred slightly, opening one amber eye. Michael smiled. "You're home now, both of you," he whispered. "No one can hurt you again." In the distance, a police transport van rumbled past, carrying Trevor Blake toward the county jail. Through the frosted window, Trevor's eyes stared outward, haunted, hollow. For the first time, he understood the thing he could never buy: redemption. As the sun rose higher, its light spilled across the yard. The snow shimmered gold, and the wooden sign glowed like a beacon. Michael lifted his gaze, the warmth of it softening the chill in his chest. "No one can buy loyalty," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's something you earn, with your heart." Behind him, Elena smiled through the rising mist. "And maybe," she said, "with a little bit of faith." The wind swept gently through the trees, carrying the echo of her words. Above the cabin, the clouds broke apart, and one bright star lingered faintly in the morning sky, a North Star, guiding every lost soul home. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through a loyal heart, a second chance, or the courage to forgive. In the frozen silence of North Willow, Michael, Ranger, and Shadow found something far greater than justice. They found grace. And maybe that's what God's miracles truly are. Ordinary people who choose compassion when the world gives them reason not to, and the quiet light that leads every lost soul home, like a North Star in the storm. If this story touched your heart, let it shine for someone else. Share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to join us in spreading stories of hope, redemption, and faith. And may God bless you, wherever you are tonight. May He guide your steps, protect your heart, and remind you that even in the coldest winter, His light never fades.